As you walk in and you're like, wow, this is Shackleton's bed right here.
Welcome to 10-Minute Travels. With me, as always, is Shane Patrick.
And with me, as always, is Phil Freeman. Tonight we're going to be talking with Ryan Skorecki, helicopter pilot flown all over the world. If you want to learn more about him or other things we talked about at 10 Minute Travels, check us out at 10minutetravels.com.
Let's get right to it, shall we?
How many divisions of scientists are there? Like, there's the folks that are studying the meteorites. I assume there's people studying the penguins.
Yep, there's biologists that study the penguins, the seals, and the whales. And then you've got there's atmospheric scientists down there who are studying all sorts of aspects of the atmosphere. NASA's got a huge project that goes on down there, the long LDB, the long duration balloon facility, and so they launch these balloons that are. It's pretty remarkable when you so it starts off as this kind of really really long skinny balloon, and it's carrying a multi-$1,000 payload of all sorts of instruments, and they let the balloon go, and of course as the balloon rises it expands, and it's pretty incredible. They launched one of them last year, and when they did it, I remember that particular time I just happened to be in our office, and I was talking to the one of my coworkers in the department there, and she had like their website on the screen, and it shows you how high the thing is. And I went outside and looked at it and was like, oh yeah, I can still see it way up there. And you go back inside and it's like, and I remember Megan was her name, and she's like, how high do you think it is? She had covered up the thing, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, it's got to be, I'm looking out her window at it like, I don't know, maybe like 4,000 or 5,000 feet or something. And it's like, it was tens of thousands of feet. It's something like 60,000 feet.
And you could still see it.
It's huge. And I remember having that reaction like, wow, this thing, I can't believe I can see it plain as day like that. It's just ridiculously far away. And then she said, well, yeah, it's the size of a football stadium. Like when that balloon fully inflates.
What?
It's that big. But so anyway, the reason why NASA has this project down there is because of the way the wind patterns down there work. That balloon, they can launch it and it will stay circling down there for weeks, and then when they want, all they can control is how high and low it goes. Like with
what, they have some heat source that they're changing.
They can like let gas out. Like the thing somehow has tanks on it where they can release gas or into the balloon or release gas from the balloon to make it rise or fall. And so when they're ready to bring it down, they just wait until it's circling and gets closer to the spot where they want to let it down, and then they'll let it down. And then, of course, at a certain point, they lose control over, like it gets past the point of no return where they like, yep, it's going down here now. And so ideally, it ends up in a spot where a plane can get to it, one of the ski planes. But like 2 years ago, or was it last year? I get them all mixed up. Either last year or the year before. It ended up in a crevasse field. So they actually had to use us. It took them multiple trips and multiple days of going up there and moving. They had to take apart that whole structure with all the instruments and everything because it's too heavy for us to pick up in one shot. So yeah, they disassembled it and then we moved it over to where the planes could pick up the pieces. But so anyway, that's a huge source of funding is that one NASA project, that long duration balloon facility. And they do multiple launches per year. But so that's studying atmospheric stuff that's happening. And then let's see what else you got. There's another big project. It's called the LTER, the Long Term Ecological Research Project, and they've been studying for decades down there, just establishing a baseline of what's happening everywhere, like measuring all the lakes, the streams. So they have stream gauges and equipment monitoring those stream gauges. They've got projects happening in all the different lakes where they're constantly measuring the like salinity and temperature and sampling the water and all those things. And so they're just trying to establish a baseline of what's happening there so that they can see if we're messing it up by being there, And then you got, of course, geologists, glaciologists. There's an interesting project that's been happening the last few years with these submersible robots where they're in preparation for exploring like moons and other planets, like frozen planets where they think that there's water underneath the ice surface. So they're testing those robots down there. It's like a similar thing. Like they have to figure out a way to get through ice and then put this robot down there and have it maneuver its way around. And so that's another NASA kind of funded project. And then NASA really likes the dry valleys because it's an analog to Mars. They say it's as close as you get to Mars on Earth. So they test all sorts of equipment there. And they also biologists are looking for life there because they say, hey, if it can live here, it can live on Mars because the conditions are the same. And then on Erebus, you get volcanologists. I'm sure I'm leaving out some, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of different projects that happen there every year.
And the tourist stuff that happens, is that anywhere near you guys?
There are. We will see cruise ships that come down, but they don't. Most of that cruise stuff happens over on the peninsula side. But we will get some cruise ships that come into the area, and they'll do. Occasionally, they'll get flown to, like the ship will have its own helicopter, and they'll fly people like to the base. And so basically, they'll come in, and you'll see them walking around, and they just go to the store and buy a T-shirt or whatever. And they come back and go back to the boat. And then they're in the dry valleys. There's like a identified spot that is that's allowed for tourists to land. There's otherwise you're not supposed to land in the valleys because it's they have these ASPAs and Antarctic Specially Protected Areas and ASMAs, Antarctic something managed area. I forget what it all stands for, but and so all the member nations to the Antarctic Treaty have all agreed like these are the rules we're going to play by down here. So if for tourists you have to go to these spots so you don't mess up the valleys. And then there's historical huts that are around, and so tourists will stop at those. Huts built by Shackleton and Scott, and like the early explorers, they weren't idiots. They're trying to get to the South Pole, so they want to go as far south as they can on their ships, right? And that's as far south as you can go is the Ross Sea. That's as close as you can get on a ship to the South Pole. Right. So depending on where so like when you first get there, the sea ice is much farther north than Ross Island where our base is, but as the season progresses, the ice breaks up and it melts further and further south. And so, like I told you, that by the end of the season, in front of the base is open water. And so now, of course, we have icebreakers and the icebreaker comes down every year and ensures that opens up so that we can get fuel and food and everything in the ships that come behind the icebreaker. But of course, historically, those guys, the early explorers, didn't have icebreakers. So depending on how far back the ice broke out, that would determine, depending on how far south the ice broke out, that would set the limit for how far south those ships could go each year. Sure. So as you work your way down Ross Island, there's a series of huts. Like one year, Scott came down and he made it as far as where McMurdo is, and so he built a hut. And then after that, the next group came down, but the ice didn't break out that far that year, so they built up. Shackleton built his hut a bit further up. So there's a hut at Cape Evans, a hut at Cape Royds, a hut at Hut Point near us, and it's pretty cool. Like you walk in there and it's just like they left. I mean, the food and everything, gloves and everything's all hanging on the walls, and they're locked up so that you can't
take the gloves,
take stuff. But so those are kind of popular spots for the tourists because you walk in and you're like, wow, this is Shackleton's bed right here, and it looks just like that. There's jars of food and everything from 1900 whatever.
Right, just because the environment is...
Yeah, it's so dry.
And is that where they have the marathon too?
They do marathon out on the... Well, it kind of like starts and ends on the island, but it'll go out on the sea ice. Okay. They have a couple different races. They do like a turkey trot, and they do a full marathon. I think there's another Antarctic marathon that happens somewhere else on the continent, but there's definitely 2 big foot races that happen on
That your organization, yeah.
Yeah, and then they have like an uphill, downhill, the uphill. So right behind McMurdo, there's a 700-foot high hill that's called Observation Hill or Ob Hill, everyone calls it. So they have the Ob Hill uphill, it's a race. That might be on, I feel like that's on Christmas.
That was Ryan Skorecki, helicopter pilot extraordinaire. If you want to learn more about him or anything else we talked about at 10 Minute Travels, check us out at 10minutetravels.com.
And we want to remind you to make sure that your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure.
And please like, subscribe, and share this podcast on all the platforms.